Stan, we're live.
All right. Thank you, Larry, the Liberty Guy. Welcome back to In the Dugout on this Thursday, our last show of the week. And this is going to be a follow-up show, the first half of it to our discussion yesterday. In just a few minutes, we'll be bringing on State Representative Brian Newberry and from Northern Rhode Island. And we'll talk to him. He's sponsoring a bill that passed unanimously in the House recently. The Senate version is yet to be heard in committee, but yesterday's guest, as many of you saw, Stanley Kurtz from the National Review, feels that the language in this bill represents some model language that the left is using throughout the country to advance left-wing causes within our education system. So we'll see what Rep. Newberry has to say about that, and we'll bring him on in just a few minutes. At the bottom of the hour, of course, our Thursday tradition, we'll be bringing in Dr. Andrew Boston to talk about all things COVID. Yes, we're still in a state of emergency. No, the governor has not given us a good reason why we're still in the state of emergency. And yes, or no, I should say no, the General Assembly is still sitting on its hands and allowing this oppressive state of emergency to continue. Now, I'm going to prep a show a week from today. We're going to start at least through the end of this legislative session on Thursdays, talking with Chris Carlosi. He's the Rhode Island and Massachusetts director for the National Federation of Independent Businesses. In Rhode Island, he probably represents the largest business group in the state. And they had a meeting last week with Governor McKee, and he's not very happy with what he heard. He's not very happy. We'll tell you about that next week. Well, Chris will tell you about it next week. It's not looking good for small businesses in this state. We've been saying that since McKee took office. We've talked about how these climate deals and everything else he's doing is not bode well. I mean, if he thinks that just opening up some restrictions or lessening some COVID restrictions and handing out a few $1,000s in federal grant money is enough to help the small business community, he's got another thing coming to him. We've got the worst business climate in the country, and they're making it worse. They're making it worse. All right, so that's next week. All right, let's do just a very quick round of batting practice where I'll cover a few quick topics. Put on my baseball cap. I'm going to go with my Green Bay Packers cap today. My favorite team. You guys all know I go against the grain. Okay, left-wing silliness. Stocks tumbled today. Again, I'm not going to spend much time on this. We'll have time to talk it more later, but Joe Biden is talking about, to pay for all this money, talking about raising capital gains, and that directly affects investment. Capital gain gives you a tax break if you invest and keep it in the investment for over a year. Well, when you tax capital gains, you tax investment and you lessen investment. That's why the stock market went down. Again, more silliness. The House passed, this is the U.S. House, not Brian Newberry's house. The House passed in D.C. To allow D.C. to become a state. Now, what's the problem with this? There is a process to follow, but this is a big thing. This could shift control of the United States Senate. This is not an issue you pull a bait and switch on after you get elected, after you win a majority in the House or the Senate or even the presidency. An issue this big needs to be publicly debated, probably for years, certainly as part of any campaign by the president, by leaders in the House, by leaders in the Senate, and say, if elected, I'm going to vote for. We didn't hear anything about this, just rumors of it. This is the problem with what's going on in Washington, D.C., and which goes on in our state. These big ideas, whether they're always left-wing, these big left-wing ideas, nobody's campaigned on them. Nobody set them up for, hey, if you vote for me, I'll do this. So, that way we can they just spring them on us out of nowhere and claim that they have some kind of mandate. Baloney. They don't have any mandate if you didn't discuss it, if there hasn't been adequate public debate. We're all about public debate. Issues this big need public debate, like statehood. Now, here's another little silly one. This doesn't need any public debate, but it certainly warrants public criticism. our left-wing, politically correct treasurer, he's going to cut pension funds investments in profitable fossil fuels companies. He's not cutting it because they're not profitable. He's cutting because it's politically incorrect. When you're running a pension fund, your only consideration should be maximizing returns on investment, not playing politics. And why can he play politics? Because if the investment portfolio, the pension fund portfolio doesn't perform to expectations, they just go back to you, the taxpayers, and me, and charge us more, make us fill up the gap. I mean, it's such a crazy system the way these public pensions are set up. It doesn't matter what the pension fund returns, because they always come to us to fill in the gaps. So let me set up before we bring on Rep. Newberry what happened yesterday, and then we'll bring on our guest. So yesterday, you may recall in this show about a month ago, maybe a little longer, our own Justin Katz on his weekly performance raised awareness about a couple of bills that would he put it in the interesting. He didn't put it in the good or the bad. If you remember, he had the good, the bad, and the interesting. He said, this one's interesting. I like some parts of it, and I'm a little leery about some parts of it. He liked the civics education part of it. He didn't like the part that demanded students go out and conduct some kind of civics project, and the fact that there was some kind of private funding that could be available with our education system. And so we talked about it a little, and we let it go. But then we see national articles written on this, and by a very prominent man, by Stanley Kurtz, writes for National Review. You see him on all the cable stations. He wrote a dedicated article on this bill, and he made some really, really harsh accusations, generally about any. He was accusing Republicans who supported this bill as being duped into thinking that this kind of bill was actually good, when he laid out yesterday all these reasons why he thought this bill was dangerous. In fact, he sent me a note today, and I want to read that note to you and then have our guest comment on it. Unanimous passage in the House. Wow, very scary. If and when this becomes law, which seems very likely, and this is from Stanley Kurtz, keep an eye out for things like students being pressured into protests they don't really favor. Let me know if you run into such abuses down the road, and I'll write about them. We're going to have to fight this battle on the ground for years, likely, and Rhode Island will be one of the early warning states, I fear. Now, are his fears, do they have any foundation to them, or is it just speculative fears? One more item before we bring on Rep. Newberry. I did get a note from somebody else who I trust. I haven't validated this independently, but a source on the East Bay. Apparently, there's something called the Kickamute Middle School. I think that's Warren or Bristol. That's been using something called Generation Citizen, which he claims is part of this activist civics scheme for several years now. And he says, we have not found one course which teaches what we would consider traditional civics. And I think the unspoken thing here is that it's all left-wing activism. So I don't know. Stanley Kurtz also said there's a federal scheme. Biden and Congress have plans to do a HUD-like roadmap, Rhode Island type grant program to push this left-wing agenda in schools. What we're going to talk about, Rep. Newberry, has nothing to do with that directly, other than Kurtz would probably claim that it's part of the whole larger scheme. But we're not talking about those bills. We're talking about a bill in Rhode Island. And in the House, it was 5028. The primary sponsor was Rep. Newberry, Brian Newberry. Brian, welcome to In the Dugout. And I see right away you've got a great baseball cap on.
As I say, even though I'm a Yankee fan, I'm also a Phillies fan. I brought this in. As I showed you before, just for you, Mike, I brought that.
Oh, my Expo. Now, you know what? That looks about as beat up as my Expo's cap.
This is from the 70s. You should see maybe you can see the dust on it. It's been sitting up on top of my old soccer ball up there for forever. So,
you know what happened to my Expo's cap? Mine was from the 80s, of course, when I played.
Yep.
Not only did it shrink a lot, but I had it in my sunroom, and I went to pick it up. And, there's cardboard in the brim, and sometimes there's a little cardboard in the band. It all crumbled. And it was just, it like turned to dust. I hadn't touched it in like 20 years. So anyway.
Was it blue or was it the red, white, and blue vintage?
No, it was that very one right there.
That's the only one to wear, the old one, yeah. And then
Yeah.
the Phillies one this is from when I was in college, right before they switched to the much better looking uniforms they've had for the last 30 years. But this was the old 70s.
I love the Phillies pinstripes the best.
Yeah, that's the one they switched to when I was a senior. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that one. All right. Yankees fan, Phillies fan. Wow. Okay, cool.
Well, I grew up a Yankees fan. I went to Philadelphia while they were only in that. There was no interleague play. So I went to the vet constantly. Of course, they became a Phillies fan. They were terrible. It was fun to go.
All right. Well, Stanley Kurtz from National Review came down pretty hard on, quote, I'll just say Republicans like you. I don't know if you saw the interview, your initial reaction.
So I didn't see the interview. I didn't have time. I'm sorry. Because, legislature's a part-time thing for me. I did
Yeah.
this little missive in National Review. And by the way, for the record, I have been a reader of National Review since, 1994. I mean, I think it's a great magazine. I, agree with him most of the time. He's completely conflating two separate issues. He's raising a legitimate concern, absolutely legitimate concern, but it's totally divorced from my bill. And that's what ticks me off. I don't like it when someone comes in from a national perspective, knowing nothing about anything locally on the ground, and starts taking pot shots at local people. It's kind of like when people do national political analysis of Rhode Island legislative races or, congressional races.
Yeah,
they don't know what they're talking about. You know what I mean?
They're so off base often, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they mean well, but they're not. Look, he is legitimately concerned, and I agree with him about the possibility of, I would call it, left-wing indoctrination in public education in this country. Absolutely, it's a concern. It can be done through any number of means. It can be done through history courses or anything else. The origin of my bill is very simple. We have in my town, I represent North Smithfield Boroughville. I live right down the street from North Smithfield High School. My daughter graduated from there. She graduated from this program many years ago. We have what I would term to be, it's not called a civics program, but it is a civics program. It's a history and civics class. And it goes in depth on the founding of this country, Federalist Papers. And it's very, very, the teacher's excellent. She's been teaching it for years. The kids come out of there, whatever their perspectives, they learn all the sides of all the arguments about all that stuff. That's what I envision as what we should have. Not every district teaches that kind of thing. And there was some model legislation quite different from what we passed. I think it came from more conservative resource, if I remember correctly, that I first introduced like 3 or 4 years ago. And, think bills do need fixing. The first one wanted testing requirements. And I actually agreed with the teachers unions on this one. They didn't want testing. And I'm not a big fan of standardized testing at all. That's a different topic, but I'm not. And eventually I sat down with my main co-sponsor, a Democrat, a friend of mine from East Providence, who I would call a traditional left of center Democrat. He's not some crackpot leftist.
That's Representative Amori,
who is a history teacher. I think he might be athletic director now, but he's taught history at East Providence High School for like 30 years. Great guy. He's not into indoctrinating students. That's not his thing. And he and I agree on a lot of things. We disagree on a lot of things. And we sat down last January before COVID interrupted this. And we rewrote the bill somewhat, and we both agree that putting in for civics education, it's both theoretical and practical, okay? And putting in some kind of project assessment, which is not at all unusual around schools. Our kids have project assessments as part of their graduating requirement generally.
Right.
Made sense. Now,
usually community service based, not political.
Yeah, but this isn't necessarily political. Can it be turned or twisted or misused? Yes, it can. And that's my point. We need to be careful how this is implemented. And what bothers me was the attack on the bill it shouldn't be an attack on the bill. It should be, look, we need to implement this correctly. Don't forget, we have 36 separate school districts in this state. Each school district is going to do they have their own basis in the curriculum, okay? And then we have RIDE, which will
isn't this bill going to take away that local autonomy and force them to do things they may or may not want to do?
No, not at all. It doesn't say that at all. And that's what bothers me about this. Let me tell you something. If you in my district, my school committee would never allow this to be used to propagate basically activism for one side. I don't think it's about activism. It's about making kids be educated about how government works. You don't know how government works unless you get involved in it in some capacity.
Well, I agree with you on that, right?
Yeah.
If it was just about civics education and legitimate, middle of the road history, that's fine. But the bill does have an activist portion to it. Right. Agreed. I mean, you could call it that. Those may not be the words in the bill, but when you lobby, or I forget what the other term was, there were two things you have to do.
Yeah,
something.
No, it doesn't say about protest. It says conduct analytical research on a local community issue and of their choice, of the student's choice.
And then lobby.
Institution of government to influence the issue, which you could say is lobbying, but I'll give you an example, right? Right now, we have an ongoing debate locally. It has nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans. But this is a classic example of what it's going to do. We have an ongoing debate. We just closed an old elementary school. There's a debate in town about what do we do with that. That's a classic civics project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Students get involved in that. Now, if you've got teachers who are trying to indoctrinate their students through any political philosophy, left wing, right wing, Democrat, Republican, right? Can the teacher abuse their authority? Sure, they can, but they can abuse their authority now. You know what I'm saying? If the problem is we think public education there's too much indoctrination from a liberal left wing perspective, that is a serious issue. My bill is not going to make that better or worse.
Well, I don't know. I'm going to challenge you on that one, but I'm going to get to that one in a second. So why not just stop with the civics education? Why do we have to go to this activist project component?
Because when you're studying science, okay, you study book learning, so to speak, of science. You're studying chemistry, right? And then you do laboratory experiments because you'll never understand chemistry without understanding the experimental side. Same with civics. Civics is not history. Civics is not. It's how things.
Science is science. It's data. We know what's going to happen when we do experiments. Politics is so subjective, so divisive right now. Why do we want to introduce kids to that?
Because that's part of life. And by the way, in my experience, I know it varies from district to district, okay, but in my experience, the kids in my town, they're all over the map politically. They get involved in all kinds of things. Because this same class over the years, I've had students from that class come to me and say they'd like to get more involved in local stuff. Some of them have helped out with my campaign. Some of them have gone and helped out Representative Cicilline. That's just part of life.
All right, so
I understand that.
So we talked. You and I talked before I interviewed Kurtz. Yes, and I raised some of the issues you raised with him. And his, so I want to tie it into the next point. Now, there's another feature of this bill that sets up, and I'm trying to find the wording here, a
Project Trust Fund.
Civics Project Trust Fund that could be funded by private organizations or foundations.
Right.
And obviously, if you get a big donor, they're going to demand that their curriculum be covered, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that because they can demand all they want to, but no one has to follow those demands. And the bottom line is, Mike, why are we assuming these donors are all going to be from one political perspective? Are we saying
that's just the history? In theory,
no, but seriously,
go both ways. But this is how the left spends their money.
Yeah, well, you know what? Maybe the right should start spending its money. I bet you know one of my favorite bloggers, Glenn Reynolds, the history professor, a law professor from Tennessee. You ever read his blog?
No, I don't. No.
Oh, you don't? You should read it. Instapundit.com. It's a great blog. But one of the points he's been making for years is maybe some conservative billionaire should go out there and buy some magazines, start tilting them. You can't fight a culture war without fighting a culture war. And sitting here and whining that one side spends money on something, the way to defeat that? Spend money counteracting it.
All right. So we talked about that with Kurtz, and his point was, why should we have any political view, any corporate influence in our educational system, left or right?
Well, this is one way to fund the program. Do you want to raise taxes? I mean,
what needs to be funded?
Well, for one thing, part of the problem is if you're going to institute a new piece of a core curriculum, you have to have some way to fund it. I mean, one of the reasons this bill, and this is not a controversial topic, but if you notice it's phased in over 5 years, is to allow districts to actually implement it without hiring additional staff. That's not, I don't want to say a SOP, it's a nod to local school committees and their funding issues. The reality is that our public education money, I know we spend a lot of money on public education. We do not get a very good result in a lot of districts.
That's for sure.
Yeah. That doesn't mean, though, that we're not necessarily spending enough money. We may be misappropriating and misspending a lot of it, but money does buy results in certain circumstances. Now, we can get the whole discussion about public education and family roles and all that kind of stuff. But look, in my town, we're considered to have pretty high quality schools. And, we still could use more funding. And we don't have
that's Woonsocket, Roroville, what town?
North Smithfield.
North Smithfield.
We don't have the highest paid teachers. We have one of the better systems. And yet you walk into our high school and it still looks like a throwback to 1962. You know what I'm saying? I mean, money does matter.
All right, let me ask you this, because as you know better than me, how long you've been a rep? How long now? 10, 12 years?
I was elected as a Republican the year Obama won. Defeated incumbent Democrats. So I was a very rare person indeed.
2008. Okay.
2008,
so
yes.
You're on your 7th term now. Okay. Yes. Congratulations. Okay. So you know this way better than me. Many pieces of legislation are cookie cutter, what we call model legislation that might start in some state or might be written by some special interest group, and then it just gets cookie cutter sent around. Now, Stanley Kurtz, I asked him specifically, I said, have you looked, because he mentioned that Rhode Island, that there are 2 states now that have activist civics. Now, he's framing this activist civics. First of all, do you agree with that categorization?
I think, well, yes and no. He's framing it in a negative way. I mean, as I said, I think that's a legitimate way to look at civics education. The question is, how is it steered? How is it implemented?
All right. He says there's already similar things enacted in Illinois. I think he said 2015, and Massachusetts, maybe 2018 or 19. And that the track record there is not good, that everything is going far left. You know, the kids are fighting against Second Amendments and fighting for Green New Deals and all that stuff. So my question, do you know you said you rewrote the bill this year. Do you know the origins of this legislation? Is it model legislation? He said, I haven't done a strict comparison, but the language is very similar to Illinois and Massachusetts. So do you know where the original language came from for this?
Well, again, when I say rewrote it, it's not an entirely new bill based on the original model. It's probably a mishmash of things. So the short answer to your question is no, but it's not like it's cookie cutter carbon copied from some other bill.
Okay.
There may be elements of it that are, I don't know, but I don't have a problem with it. So.
All right. There's also a clause in here, number 4, in one of the sections, prioritize supporting course implementation in districts that serve historically underserved students. Yeah. What is the purpose of that? Why should minority students or underserved students be treated differently than?
Well, I think it's a question of it's a question of funding. Let's fund the communities that have been underserved, which both, I mean, look, Providence be Exhibit A. I mean, let's face it. Do you think public education in this state is equal from district to district?
No, but if you're teaching a brand new curriculum, why would you need to spend more in underserved communities?
I don't think it just says to spend more. It's just prioritizing. If you're going to prioritize, where do you start setting?
Because it says later on, the amounts credited to the fund may focus on underserved communities.
Yeah, they may focus. Yeah.
So it's language like this that makes me think. It's language like this that makes me think this is largely cookie cutter language, because that's typical language. You wouldn't write that into a bill, but this is what the left puts into everything these days, right?
Yeah, but I don't have a problem with that in this context. I don't. I understand what you're saying. I don't have a problem with that in this context. I don't.
Okay.
I said, like I said, the issue is legislation. The issue is how it gets implemented. And what he's bringing up as concerns are concerns. It has to be implemented properly. And if it's not, that's a problem. But that's not a problem with the bill. That's a problem with the implementation. It's a bigger problem. Well, but they shouldn't be conflated.
I'm going to agree. I'm going to agree with Kurtz in this much. I don't know if it's conflating the same thing, but I don't know why we just can't have a straight civics bill. Maybe you can argue it's a nicety to have an action project, but why can't we just have straight civics, no action advocacy lobbying that has a danger of going sideways, and no private funding of it? Why can't we just have a civics bill?
Well, it's funny. There's an earlier version of a Senate bill that kind of does that, like a one-line type thing. But I guess you could. But as I said earlier, I don't think civics is the same as teaching English. I think a component of civics is engaging and learning how that works. And by the way, I would be happy to talk to any student in my district who disagrees with me about an issue, because it's my opportunity to educate them as to why they're wrong. I think that's something you can bear in mind here too. A lot of kids have a lot of, look, I was a Democrat when I was young too, Mike. I wised up, that's what happens. All right. I would love to have the kids in my district who want to lobby me about some issue that I think they're just wrong on, sit down with me and I can talk to them. I think that's a great education. Now, obviously it depends who your rep or your senator are, right? But that's how I feel about it.
All right. I want to spend the last few minutes, not talking about your bill, but just talking about a larger issue that Kurtz raised yesterday, about the federal plans for education. Apparently, there's a rule put forth by Biden, just recently announced.
I just read that yesterday.
There's legislation. Yeah, there's legislation. I forget what it was called. Of course, they always give it nice names. And when I made the analogy, he said, bingo, that's exactly right. Apparently the Department of Education, the Biden administration are going to create this large fund of money. And just like with Roadmap Rhode Island, this was my theory, and he said it was right on. Just like Roadmap Rhode Island with those community development block grants, right? If you adopt these crazy affordable housing schemes, you can get this pot of money. Well, apparently the same thing's going to be happening in education now. If you teach the 1619 project, if you teach critical race theory and whatever the hell else they say, here's a pot of money for your money-starved school district. And his larger theory is that bills like just help advance that a little bit more unwittingly. But I don't want to talk about the bill. I want to talk about this larger education push by the left to dominate and control what's taught in our school systems. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I actually just read about that yesterday, and I agree with him completely on that. I was just reading that there's a bill. It's up for comment. I don't know how the process works, but it's up for public comment through May. And they want to tie funding to teaching critical race theory in the 1619 project. Right. I find that appalling. Right. Critical race theory is garbage. It's pseudo-Marxist nonsense. And the 1619 project's being totally discredited. I can't believe the New York Times won a Pulitzer for it. You have professors all over the country of all bents, Democrats, Republicans, calling it garbage. We should call it what it is. And the idea that federal dollars would be tied to that is appalling. Absolutely appalling. That's my thought on that. I don't know if I can be more strongly worded than that.
When you would know this better than me. If there's going to be, picture the community development block grants from HUD, right? I'm sure you pretty much understood how that worked, and I know you were with us in our fight against Roadmap Rhode Island, and I'm now calling this federal effort the Roadmap Rhode Island of education. Who has the authority normally to accept the federal funds? Would it be the town or city council? Would it be the school board itself?
I don't know, but I think first it would be the legislature, wouldn't it? I would have to come through our state budget because so much of our school funding.
No. They went, well, not if they do it like HUD. HUD went directly from HUD to the town.
Then it'll be up to if there's grants, if they can go directly to the town, it'll be up to the school committees, which goes back to my point earlier. Something else you and I talked about yesterday. We were setting this up. If people care about public education in this country and it being done properly and not being turned into Marxist nonsense, get involved in your local school boards. Pay attention to what's being taught, because that's where it all starts. Everything is local. Everything is local. It all starts local. The money may flow down, but it all starts local. Get involved in your school committees. Pay attention to what's going on.
And that's how we ended our interview, with a message to parents that you can't just sit back and bitch about it if you don't like it. Do something. Get involved, run for the school board, raise hell, whatever it takes, get organized and do something about it. Because it is coming. Critical race theory, 1619 baloney is coming into our schools. There's going to be a massive push, and we've got to make sure that honest education and and this is my only concluding comment. I just feel, even though in theory you are correct, I just feel that this bill, that the local bills, your bill and the one in the Senate, would open up politics to kids, and I don't trust it in the hands of teachers. All right, because the teachers unions have have openly backed the most radical left progressive agenda out there, and if the teachers are in charge of picking topics, the unions are going to pressure them.
Just two concluding thoughts on that.
Sure.
Number one, I have, in my personal experience, as someone who's walked door to door and all that, and had 3 kids get to public education, teachers are a lot less left-leaning than teachers unions.
Agree.
Okay, not all teachers think that way.
That's why I said teacher union pressure.
Yeah, but number two, more importantly, it goes back to my point. If conservatives care about this kind of stuff, they need to get more involved in education in general. Become teachers. Encourage people to become teachers. Get involved in the funding. If there's a way to fund projects like this, fund it. You got some philanthropist that has money to burn, spend it on this. Counteract it. That's how it works. That's how the real world works.
All right, last question. And this is hypothetical, but based on some conversations I've had in the last few days. So this Kurtz interview has raised awareness. I think there are some people who agree with me. Let's just have a straight civics education bill. Forget the fund, forget the the activist project or whatever you call it. I don't know if there could be any changes on the Senate side, which is yet to have a hearing yet. But if there was a Senate version that didn't have those two elements and your version that did, and it was reconciled, would you support legislation like this if it didn't have those other two components in it?
You know, I'm going to sound like a classic politician ducking your question. But honestly, here's the thing. And this is true. You know me a long time. I don't say I would support or not support something until I actually see it. I can't.
That's fair. That's good. That's fair. But you would agree, without saying what you'd support, that in your mind, the key to everything is the civics education, that you feel the civics education outweighs these potential other risks, right? I mean, you're for this, not for the action and not for the fund. You're here for the civics education, right? And you believe that's the thing we need to keep our eye on.
I think that's paramount. I think those other items, actually add to it. And I also think that people.
But it's not the core, right? The core is the education, the civics education.
And I agree. Can they be abused? Yes, but our education system can be abused as it stands now. If somebody wants to indoctrinate our students through garbage history classes, they can do it now. That's my point. It's a much bigger issue than just this bill. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Rep. Newberry, you're an honorable man for coming on. Stanley Kurtz put up quite a salvo against you yesterday, but and he means well too. And I told him right off the bat, I said, Jessica De La Cruz in the Senate and Brian Newberry, these are great conservative people. They're friends of ours. They mean well by all this. Stanley Kurtz means well too. It's just a very interesting debate, and I really appreciate your coming on to discuss it, Brian.
No, anytime, Mike.
State Representative Brian Newberry.
Go Yankees, Mike, right? Go Yankees.
I can't. I'll let you say that.
All right.
Take care. We'll talk soon. All right. We're waiting for Dr. Boston to zoom in. I don't know if he's here. Larry the Liberty guy. Maybe we should shoot him a note with the credentials. I forgot to send him the Zoom link today. So if you could do that. So I'd be curious. Let me look at the comments here. I mean, Rep. Newberry did a great job. I'm really torn. Is this legislation as dangerous as Stanley Kurtz thinks it is, or do you trust Rep. Newberry's assessment that it's all theoretically possible? Yes, there's danger, but not likely to happen. I'll be curious to know what your thoughts are. And I'm going to be clear on this. I would much prefer to see a bill, and we are already underway with some conversations with some people in the Senate. I don't know if they'll go anywhere, but I would much rather see this bill without the Civics Project Trust Fund and without the activist civics component, which is the lobbying or research projects. Just teach history, just teach civics. You can have discussions in the classroom, but I just don't trust teachers unions. I just don't. They've gone so far left. Rep. Newberry was right. Most teachers are not wacko leftist progressives like the union bosses are, but the union bosses, as we've seen this year, control everything. They won't let teachers even get back in the classroom. I mean, if there ever was a time when private education would be more attractive than ever, it's right now. Because this, what we're talking about with the roadmap Rhode Island of education and this legislation would not apply to private schools or homeschools. Only those only those government schools, public and traditional K through 12 public and government charter schools. Education's the key to our future. We can turn our kids into productive, great citizens, or we can turn them into these hateful, brainwashed, woke robots. It's really that simple. Which way is it going to go? All right. Speaking of woke robots, it's not Dr. Andrew Boston, but I'm sure he might not disagree with that categorization of our esteemed Rhode Island Director of Health, Nicole Alexander Scott, who just seems to get up there and is a one-trick pony, right? Dr. Boston, what did you think of the, welcome back to In the Dugout, first of all. Oh boy, your audio is all messed up again. All right, you might have to sign off and sign back in. You sound like one of those million mile per hour speed up the tape cartoons. All right, last time when he signed back in, we were able to fix that. All right, so there was another press, the traditional COVID press conference today. I'll say first, before I turn it over to Dr. Boston, Dr. Scott, to me,
Mike, is that working?
That's better, Andy. Yeah, hold on one second. I'll get to you. Let me just say this about Dr. Scott. She is so didactic and condescending. She talks to us like we're third graders and such slow and carefully chosen words. And it's the same thing over and over again. And it seems, Dr. Boston, to deny the reality of the science in many cases. Your thoughts on what you heard today?
Right. Well, I have no objection, to the tone of her presentations, the way she articulates what she's saying. It's the content the problem with.
All right.
He's beneath those calm tones, it's propaganda and counterfactual nonsense. I mean, she made statements today that are, she look, we've dealt with the masking issue. Masks work. Shut up. Wear them. Okay, that's her dictate on a weekly basis. But this week, the whole thrust of what she was saying was that if you don't get vaccinated, regardless of your age, you are, she put it, again, counterfactually, you're at this stage when we've got the latest data are 89, over 89 of the 65 plus have gotten at least partially vaccinated or fully vaccinated. She said that regardless of age, regardless of your risk of developing COVID, either contract or developing complications, if you don't get vaccinated now, run out and get vaccinated now, you are increasing your risk for developing COVID when
she said every day you increase your risk. That's false.
It's patently false because whether even if you were to take the extreme position that a lot of these vaccine enthusiasts take, that the only valid immunity, which again it's false, comes from being vaccinated. Well, as the more people get vaccinated, the more you're getting toward herd immunity. Even if you ignore now immunity, so there's no logic to that.
There's
statement.
Less of a chance you'll catch.
Of course there is. Of course there is. That's the whole purpose of vaccinating people, to acquire herd immunity or the development of herd immunity naturally through people who get infected and cause. I mean, it's just a completely illogical statement, but it's made so dogmatically, so authoritatively. But the whole thrust, Mike, which I objected to, was they want essentially every person in the state down. I guess the EUA hasn't gotten down to 12 yet. The 12 to 15 is
the emergency use authorization, right?
The emergency use is in limbo, and I'm sorry, rushing to try and get that approved. It's on a small, but at this stage they want everyone down to 16, everyone vaccinated, and that's what they're pushing for, and that's the carrot that they're holding out. She made other statements that.
Yeah, but hold on. Let's take them one at a time. Let's dig in. Save your thought. We'll get to it. So, if everyone is to be vaccinated, the risk reward isn't the same for everyone.
Of course not. Of course not, Mike. And
you can't lump everyone together, right?
No, you can't. And she also made the categorically false statement, which was that the only way to protect yourself against variants is to get vaccinated. I have up on my screen, I didn't have a chance to send it to you, a preprint that was published from the preeminent virology lab in the United States. It's at La Jolla. It's at Scripps La Jolla. And the title, well, I won't read this, a little technical, but the entire thrust of the paper was to compare T cell responses. So this very important component, long-acting component of your immune system, the T cell mediated or so-called cell mediated immunity, and look at responses in persons who'd convalesced from COVID, or people who had received, in this case, the mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer, Moderna style vaccines. And here's the conclusion of this report, not by like Dr. Scott, who doesn't do this research, quite frankly. And unfortunately, I think she doesn't even do it anymore. This is the conclusion. T cell responses in convalescent COVID-19 subjects or COVID-19 mRNA vaccinees.
So that means people who have recovered from the virus or got the Pfizer or Moderna.
That's right. Are not substantially affected by mutations found in the SARS-CoV-2 variants. And they looked at the major lineages that we're concerned about coming from the UK, from Brazil, and even from California. If you go to the website for the state, those are the variants that they're currently concerned about. And most of the variants right now, Mike, are the UK variant. And we have a lot of data on the UK variant coming from the UK.
Let me show this. Let me show this to you right now.
Sure.
Since we're talking about the variants. So this was a graph. I don't know who this Eric Topol guy is.
Oh, I know all about him.
All right, so let me play out the graph.
Mike, to his credit, he used to be excellent interventional cardiologist. Once he stepped outside the domain, he's not bright enough to deal with these things.
So you've talked and we've talked how the experts got it wrong. So by a factor of 4, 5, 6 times how many hospital beds, maybe 10 times hospital beds we might need in this state. Who are these experts? And now there's this fear about the variants and all that. So this guy projected way back when. Here's the United States infection rate. It was going down, but when the variants hit, he projected it was gonna skyrocket.
Particularly, Mike.
And here's what actually happened.
Right. And particularly, as he put it, the B117 beast. That's the UK variant. That's the UK variant. So what we know about the UK variant is first of all from the UK, where it essentially became effectively 100% of their infections. And they're doing great. They're doing great. We've seen this happen in Texas, where it became in Georgia, in Florida. They're all doing well. Texas in particular, I think, has the highest percentage. There's plenty of good news information. Now, Michigan is having some problems, and I don't know if they're quite preponderant B117 now.
Problems in what? Cases?
In terms of infection rates. Infection rates are high. But you also have to look at the problem that they have is that they have, because they sequestered and they locked down, they have these populations of people that just never generated much immunity. And unless they're aggressive with their targeted vaccination program, they're going to have pockets. They're going to have problems. But the idea is that overall, and it wouldn't have mattered if Michigan was hit by the old strain resurgently. The literature on B117 is really clear now, Mike, and that overall it is more infectious than the original Wuhan strain, but it is not causing more hospitalization. It's just not true. Right. And apparently that is the predominant variant in the state. I looked it up, that out of the variants of concern, it's 215 out of the 320 samples that they did most recently, the data that's up on the website now. So it's about 70%.
Are the variants?
In other words, of the sample that they did of the variants of concern, the B117 variant is about 6% of the variants of concern in these surveillance. They keep doing updates.
Do you know what percentage of new cases in Rhode Island are variant?
I don't know. but we're doing well in the midst of why, I mean, look, we'll review the data, but we're doing really well in terms of infection rates, hospitalizations, and deaths.
All right.
And that's in the face of their own surveillance system pointing out that this variant now, 70% of the variants of concern that they've identified as variants of concern.
So we know the bottom line is these variants are just a toothless, spread the fear kind of thing. All right. I want to go back to something else Dr. Scott said that you and I talked about many times on this show. She made the statement that even if you've had and recovered from the virus, you should still get the vaccine.
Right. Now,
you and I have discussed, not only is that not true, but it could be deadly serious because it's not true in every case, correct?
Well, first of all, there's no, again, and I just showed you what was the conclusion of this, renowned virology institute at Scripps La Jolla in terms of at least how they can test immunity and particularly T-cell long-lasting immunity in the laboratory. That there really is no difference, and there's lots of data. Even epidemiologic data, Mike, if you look at large cohorts across the world.
I'm not talking about comparing the two. I'm saying if you've had the virus recently, should you run out the door and get a vaccine?
No, I because there's a certain unknown. First of all, you probably have a good deal of immunity. The other concern that's been raised by some immunologists is that you could have a hyper response, particularly if you've been recently infected, and that could have serious consequences. So, she's ignoring the downside, which is what's happening all the time now. She's ignoring the downside. Whether the downside is this theoretical question about whether you'll get a hyperreactive response to the vaccination if you've been recently infected, or even if you have still, nice cadre of antibodies, et cetera. It's an open question.
All right.
But she's ignoring that at the same time that she's not ignoring the risk.
Right.
You don't vaccinate. I mean, everything should be risk-based, Mom. We've said this, for weeks now.
Informed consent, right? Informed consent.
Well, and especially with these vaccines, which now, Mike, I am concerned. There's a big signal. There's a big signal from it's a very flawed surveillance system that we have. On the one hand, it's inundated with all kinds of anecdotal reports that the lay public can put in, mixed in with medical people who enter into the system. This is the CDC's vaccine adverse event reporting system, VAERS, whatever you want to call it. So it's kind of a messy system. But you do have to start looking at a pediatrician from Great Britain did this, and he just calculated crude rates of death that were dumped into this system, comparing non-COVID and COVID vaccines. And with the non-COVID vaccines, he could go back, I believe he went back 4 or 5 years, and just look at the quarterly rates. And the rates that, and they're all low, Mike. I mean, that is, they're all low in terms of death. But it's much higher for the first quarter of this year with the COVID vaccines than the historical average of the non-COVID vaccines. Yeah. So his figure came to about 0.56 deaths per million for the non-COVID vaccines, but 16.2 per million for the COVID vaccines that are out there. Now, again, that on an absolute scale, we're talking about 16. On a relative scale, compared to prior vaccines, non-COVID vaccines, it's a fold increase. So it's a signal that merits teasing out. Who are these people? Why?
All right, so the point being, you can't just say everybody go get a vaccine, because it's not right for everybody. I mean, that's the problem, right? Of these blanket, non-qualified statements that indicate she's just reading lines off a cue card or something.
Well, it's worse than that, Mike, because she's not only failing to take a risk-based approach, she's threatening and cajoling. I
Yes.
can't call it anything else in
Yes.
terms. She said,
Almost begging even.
well, maybe to you. To me, it wasn't begging. She said that so when you know the happy talk came from the governor, you know, and about businesses and the relaxation of certain things, all you know, but she said that this loosening of restrictions applied only, they're geared toward those who are fully vaccinated. So in other words, you're not going to be able to benefit from the loosening of restrictions if you're not vaccinated. That was her message. So therefore, you better get your arses in line and get vaccinated.
And we heard as much from the prior the Commerce Secretary. I mean, we now have right now, and may only last till May 28th, but we now have testing and vaccine passports. They didn't admit it, but he said, if there's a
Right.
if there's a wedding and you're having some kind of cocktail reception, you can only be allowed into that reception with proof of a negative test or vaccination. That is a testing or vaccine passport, is it not?
Well, it's certainly on its way to something that could be more insidious. And I think he was the one that said he has 2 young children who can't get vaccinated. That was the other guy. Yeah. Okay, well that's part of this whole push. That one of them said that he has 2 young children who can't get vaccinated. That's why he has to get vaccinated. In other words, he vaccinate his 2-year-old, or whatever he was referring to.
2 young children, he said. I don't know how young, but
yeah, I mean, Mike, this is a real concern. I mean, right now we speak in Loma Linda University, and I know it's a case study, and you can't go by case studies. But the fact is that one of the reasons Janssen is on pause now, and if the pause is lifted, it'll have to be directed, I hope, at a much older age group.
Yeah, some qualifications, yeah.
But there's an 18-year-old that's lying that had to have an induced coma that had presented seizures, who found to have major cuts in the circulation to her vein, the venous system circulations. So cerebral venous thromboses. She's had to have 3 invasive procedures already to remove clots. And she was an 18-year-old. I don't know what on earth was the need to vaccinate her in the first place.
All right, now, we also had a case in Rhode Island that you've raised awareness out on social media and with me, and we pledged to talk about on this show. So let's talk about. You were very concerned that there was apparently, you found it out on your own, not through the media or some announcement from the government, I think, that a 50-year-old woman died in Rhode Island the same day she got the vaccine, and you're wondering why there hasn't been any more awareness about this. What does that mean to you? What questions, I know we can't draw any conclusions, what questions does that raise in your mind?
I just want to know, first of all, if this 50-year-old woman who was vaccinated on April 6th and died on April 6th, if she is a medical examiner's case. I can't imagine why she wouldn't be. But this is all we know, Mike, and I'm getting this directly from the CDC's surveillance system. It just says, patient found deceased at home evening after receiving vaccine. That's about all we have on this woman. She received her COVID vaccine on April 6th of this year, and that evening was found at home deceased. Called to gather information on the patient. Caregiver, so I don't know what that word means, Mike, but it could indicate that she had some sort of chronic illness, or it could just be a generic word, for a family member or something like that. State patient did not have a primary care physician, therefore they do not have much medical history on her. Sound like a caregiver. Notes on the adverse reaction during post-vaccine observation. This is it. This is it. And she's she's a 50-year-old woman. That's all we know.
Nobody seems to care much about it.
No. And I found altogether, so far, and this is only through April 9th, and there's delays even, so that it's probably not even current for April 9th. But there were 8 deaths associated with the vaccine in the CDC reporting system in Rhode Island. There were 5 that were between the ages of 76 and 99 with heavy burdens of comorbidity. And, who knows whether these people were, these are merely coincidental findings.
Right.
There's another one that's also not described well in a 62-year-old male without adequate description. And then there's another in a 63-year-old female. Now, she had hypertension, hyperlipidemia, diabetes, and a cardiac murmur, but I mean, that doesn't sound, profoundly threatening.
All right, but you ready for my cynical question on this now?
Sure.
So if for the last, what has it been, 14 months now, we've been counting the number of people who have died with the COVID virus, not because of it, with it, shouldn't we start counting those people who die with the vaccine?
Of course. Again,
I'm countering silliness with silliness, right?
No, I understand that, Mike, but it does. It's a sort of cynical way to raise a very important question, and I'm glad you raised this issue with regard to COVID death ascertainment and adjudication, whatever you want to call it. I just reviewed a report that came out of Sweden when they did a random sample in the Stockholm area of deaths that occurred in what they call care homes, and it's a very revealing report because it's what drove their epidemic. Just like, look, in Rhode Island, I still think we're over 60% from nursing homes and assisted living facilities in terms of the total burden of COVID mortality in the state. What they found was when they adjudicated these deaths, the mean age was 86. Yeah. These are care homes, after all, and people live quite long in Sweden. But what they found was that in 75% of this sample, the comorbidity was so profound that they really didn't much change the clinical status between the time they were infected and the time they died. So it was very difficult to make a clean claim that COVID took their lives. Whereas in 17%, right, that was pretty clear. Even if they had a lot of comorbidity, they were stable.
But yet they marked it as a COVID death, didn't they?
In 8%, it was wrong. It was flat out wrong. They died of something else. But again, none of these deaths were going to be reassigned as non-COVID right. deaths. That's the bottom line, and that's what you're getting at, Mike.
They have one standard for one way when it suits their purpose, and they have a different standard when it doesn't.
Well, and it makes a mockery of this idea that somehow COVID deaths are undercounted. It's just absurd.
All right, let's quickly go through the Rhode Island stats, and then I got one more final issue, just a short comment on. We only got a few minutes left, so let's do this. So first of all, we'll go through the stats you send me weekly. So here is the weekly percent positivity test rate. We're still in that low 2 range.
Yeah, and I see, Mike. I rushed. I screwed up the baseline, but basically this would go back. This would go back at least to February. I mean, we've been flat. We've been flat in terms of positivity, and there's a very interesting analysis of what positive tests mean, Mike, which, based on these kinds of low numbers of actual positives, by the time you get below 5%, up to half of your so-called positives can be false positives. By the time you get down to 1%.
Why, wouldn't it nice to know if we had a cycle threshold value calculation on these? Wouldn't that be nice to know?
Exactly. Right. So nothing's changed in our request.
All right, hospitalization saw a little rise, but it looks like heading back down again.
Yeah. And again, Mike, this is another request that we've never had answered. Who are these people? Right. I mean, how many of them are admitted with COVID pneumonia versus, testing positive after trauma?
Well, and like you said, I think, well, like you talked to me, I don't know if I heard you on the radio earlier or whatever, but we know the push is coming to have every student in college and high school probably to be vaccinated in the fall, but yet the state won't tell us how many people are hospitalized or in that 16-year-old age group. How many people,
Mike, it's
were
worse.
really sick or died, and it's probably zero, but they won't tell us, will they?
Mike, it's worse than that, because today a journalist asked Dr. Scott if she would provide the positive test data in these K through 12 or college age, young people. And that she's perfectly willing to volunteer, because now it suits her need that there's more positives in that group.
Right.
But the real point is, and it's not just admissions, Mike, it's got to be admissions for pneumonia. Kids been
Right.
admitted to
Not for
pneumonia.
a broken arm, right? With
Exactly.
test positive.
Or getting drunk and coming in for hydration from alcohol and testing positive.
So here's another thing I'll point out. So you see right about here when it was about 137, then it went up to about 156. Of course, the headlines blare, hospitalizations go up by 20. Oh my God, the sky is falling. Well, now we've lost 17 of those. There's not another headline that says hospitalizations are falling by 20.
And there never will be.
You don't see that, do you? No. All right, last chart.
This is the most reassuring of all.
Measure, right? The ultimate measure, right?
Yeah, and this is the most reassuring of all. Look, there's a lot of days of zero that are popping in now, Mike. Because and they still pull this trick. Even WPRO, I've contacted their news readers to say, please don't go to the face page and tell me, quote, new deaths, and don't tell your audience new deaths. Go down and talk about the 2 zeros that are on there, because it's by date of death.
All right, last comment. Now I need to show, before I show you this, I need you to take a few deep breaths, because this is gonna say.
Is it you and your birthday suit, or what is it?
Well, that would set you off too. That's another headline. It sets me off. I don't even know. So
all right, well, you've already set yourself off. So
here we go.
End the suspense.
They're now requiring masks in Michigan for 2-year-olds.
It's sad. It's not. It's really sad. It has nothing to do with children in general, and it's certainly to do with and
that's child abuse stuff.
It is. It's very abusive, and
not only physically but emotionally, right?
It's abuse, and it's really, I think it's going to delay them in terms of language development, and just make them very fearful.
The good news out of Michigan, if I read the early part of the story, that there's petition drive going on to basically neuter the governor of Michigan, that what's her name, Gretchen Whitmer, from any of her executive orders being enforceable anymore. And apparently the petitions have reached a level where that could happen. They could take her emergency powers authorization away. I mean, if this 2-year-old mask mandate,
right,
is examples of the types of executive tyranny that the people of Michigan are living under, then Godspeed. I wish you get all the petitions signed to stop this tyrant from ruining your state.
Apparently she violates her own order. She went to visit her parents, her husband with that whole boat last spring or last summer. She's another one of these hypocritical tyrants too.
Yeah, and the reason we saw such pleas and marketing, and we'll probably be seeing a lot more of it from the state, is because now we have the demand, that we have greater supply of vaccines in the state than we have demand. It apparently seems to be, not everybody wants to get a vaccine.
But Mike, the high risk, right? The high risk population,
right?
According to CDC, 89.4%.
That's great.
Plus have been vaccinated.
That's great.
So what is the demand? I mean, that's where the risk is. Mike, we have to go back, and it's right at the DOA site. 84% of the deaths in Rhode Island have come from people P+.
Yep.
if we've done a good job vaccinating that group, then that's about all you can expect from the vaccine.
Yep. And as I've said, and you've said, the mistake we made, and anybody in my family or on this show will tell you, the mistake are these idiots in public health and in public office make is that counting cases somehow was going to be the determinant of how severe this pandemic.
Mike, we're
never have been the standard.
No, and we have such an absurdly exaggerated testing system going on here that despite the fact that our percent positivity for 10 weeks now, going on 3 months, has been in the 2% range, we still rate very high in terms of cases. and states that have 5% positivity, rate below us because they just don't tests in such an absurd, exaggerated way.
All right, Doc. Thank you again for your time today on In the Dugout. You're one of our most popular guests always. We love having you on. Dr. Andrew Boston.
Bye-bye.
Epidemiologist, Brown University. All right, folks. Well, again, listen, we're bringing you discussions that you just don't hear anywhere else. No other media was covering that civics bill. Is it activist civics? Is it opening the door to critical race theory, 1619 project junk that's going to be put into the minds of our students with minds full of mush that will be molded into become liberal activists? Or is it just a good civics education bill? I don't know the answer to that yet. I'd like to see just a pure, plain, good old civics education bill. And Dr. Boss, I mean, there's nobody that can counter the status quo baloney like he does. I mean, even on national TV, nobody does it with the passion that he does. There are many doctors nationally who disagree with the status quo approach, but we're so lucky to have Dr. Boston on this show. And I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you'll tell more friends about it. I hope you'll hit the subscribe button if you haven't done that yet. Please tell your friends about our show. Again, we go places that nobody else will go. And we have in-depth discussions where other people just give you the headline. These are important issues that need discussion, that need exposure. Ultimately, so maybe you and we together can do something about it. For In the Dugout, Mike Stenhouse. We'll see you next week, next game.